This happened early last spring. It was still chilly up in Massachusetts, where I live most of the year, so I decided to drive down to my South Carolina house for the week. Since I work remotely, I can do this whenever I want. Usually, I have my cleaning lady come after each guest leaves, and the cost is included in the rental price on Airbnb. But since I was going down right after the current renter left, I planned to clean it myself and save the cleaning fee. The last renter was a guy named Ramon. Through our messages, he told me he was renting with his fiancée and asked for restaurant recommendations. He seemed trustworthy. I prefer renting to couples or small groups of women because they're usually more respectful and less likely to cause damage compared to groups of young men. I started my drive early in the morning. It was a 16-hour drive with only brief stops for food and bathroom breaks. By the time I got to the house, it was about 10 p.m. I unlocked and opened the front door, then went back to my car to get my bags. I was exhausted from the drive, so I didn't bother checking the house for any mess. I went straight to my bedroom, unlocked it, and collapsed into bed without even brushing my teeth. A 16-hour drive will absolutely wear you out. I crawled under the covers and fell asleep within minutes. You'd think I'd sleep through the night, but I woke up around 11:30 p.m. I'd only been asleep for about an hour. Something had woken me up. I grabbed my phone to check for any texts and then turned on the bedside lamp. I looked around the room and then went out to the living room. I started checking the house, but didn't notice anything out of place. I went to the guest bedrooms, and while the covers on one bed seemed to have been moved, there was no sign of anyone. I have a camera on the front porch, and I usually only check it if there's an issue. Out of curiosity, I opened the app and reviewed the movement history. It showed a man entering the house using the code lock 3 days earlier. He was alone, which was strange. I checked the footage multiple times, and there was no movement after that until I arrived. This gave me chills. I messaged Ramon on Airbnb to ask if he had checked out okay, even though it was late at night. I went back to the guest bedroom and started checking under the bed and in the closets, opening doors quickly like ripping off a band-aid. Every closet was empty. I moved to the second guest bedroom, where both twin beds were still neat and untouched. When I opened the last closet, it was also empty. I sat on one of the beds to review my conversation with Ramon. That's when I heard the master bedroom door click shut quietly, as if someone had closed it, not a draft. I went to the living room and looked at the master bedroom door. I called out. I once booked an Airbnb by myself in an area in Arizona where I had a job interview. Since it was so far from home, I made a short trip out of it. I chose this specific Airbnb because it was much cheaper than any hotels I could find. It was about half an hour away from where I'd be interviewing, which was fine with me. It was off a secluded, dead-end road and had a nice view of the desert in the backyard. I brought my laptop to get work done for my current job during the day, which kept me busy most of the time. I stayed for 3 days. My interview was on the second day, which was a Tuesday, and I was leaving on Friday. On Monday night, before my interview, I was practicing interview questions and getting some last-minute knowledge about the company. I was doing this on my laptop in the living room of the little house, probably around 9 p.m., when I heard a tap at the window. It wasn't exactly a knock. It sounded more like someone's finger tapping the glass. My head immediately turned to look at the window. but I didn't see anyone. It was pitch black outside. I was scared to look out the window, but felt I had to. So I did. There was no one there, just darkness. Maybe it was a bug hitting the window. After all, we have some pretty nasty bugs here. The next day, I got through my interview and thought I did pretty well. For the rest of my trip, I explored different parts of the town in my car, ate at various restaurants, and relaxed in the backyard in the sun. Little did I know, I was likely being watched while I was in the backyard. That night, I was inside watching Breaking Bad on Netflix when it happened again. A single tap at the window. Now it was obvious it wasn't a bug. I was even more disturbed, but once again, I rushed to the window. Even though I saw no one, that didn't mean someone wasn't out there. I checked the windows by the front door, then opened the door and looked outside for a second. Since there was no one there, I went back inside and then to the back door. I stepped onto the back porch and looked out into the desert behind the house. It was silent and dark. Then I heard a click, like someone clicking their tongue. It was off in the distance, beyond the light from the house, out in the cold desert. I felt as though someone could be hiding behind any of those bushes, watching me and toying with me. I yelled out, and almost as if in response, there was another click. I pinpointed the direction it came from and saw someone standing not too far away, dressed in dark clothes and blending into the darkness. I started walking a little closer, but then stopped, realizing I didn't want to get any nearer to that person. I called out, "You're on private property. I'm going to call the cops if you don't leave," and saw the person eerily quickly walk away. I theorized it was the Airbnb owner, but that was a stretch, and I didn't really know what to think. The next night, I was in bed on my laptop, watching Breaking Bad again before going to sleep. I watched for about an hour and a half. I didn't hear any noises in the house, though I was definitely thinking about that encounter from earlier. When I finally turned off the light and tried to fall asleep, within 10 seconds, there was a click sound again, this time muffled from inside the closet. I looked at the closet door, which was open just a crack. Instinctively, I sprang out of bed, still in my PJs, and ran to the car. I sat in the driveway with the car running and called 911. I stared at the house as I spoke to the dispatcher, waiting to see if someone would come out because all my stuff was still in there. A police car arrived, and upon entering the house, we did a quick investigation together. It was very small, with not many places to hide. Despite finding nothing, I packed my stuff and left for a nearby hotel that night. I contacted both Airbnb and the host and was only able to get a partial refund for my stay. I still think it may have been the host of the Airbnb. I mean, who else would have access to the house? There were no signs of forced entry, which leads me to believe whoever it was may have had a key. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was a stranger who snuck in at an opportune time.
I once had 2 job interviews in North Carolina. I lived in New York at the time, and I decided to drive down there instead of flying to save money. My current job sucked, and the 2 jobs I was interviewing for could finally be a new start for me. They were corporate office jobs with a lot of benefits and good salaries, plus the weather would be much better than in New York. I was driving down on a Thursday night. I had taken Friday off from work because that's when the interviews were scheduled. Since I had to work Thursday, I had to hit the road as soon as I was off work. I stopped home first to grab my suitcase and other stuff I was bringing, then I said goodbye to my family and set off. It was a long, 8+ hour drive ahead of me. with an ETA of around 2 a.m.
I was heading to a Comfort Inn. I drank 3 cups of coffee during the first few hours of driving, and for a while, I was good. But if you're already running on fumes, no amount of coffee is going to keep you going. I hadn't gotten much sleep the night before because I was stressing over these interviews, and after a long, busy day at work, the last thing I wanted to be doing was driving close to 9 hours. It was late at night, and I had about 2 hours left in the drive. There were very few other cars on the road this late at night on a weekday. I was starting to feel really sleepy, but knew most of the drive was behind me. Suddenly, on the side of the highway, I saw a man in a suit standing there, not walking, not moving. He was facing my car, and as I looked at him while passing, I saw his face turn to follow my car. I said out loud, "What the underscore?" It was truly bizarre. I almost contemplated turning around and asking if he needed a ride. He was just in the middle of the highway in a suit at like 12:30 at night. I came up with stories in my head about what may have happened, like maybe his girlfriend kicked him out of the car. I did this to keep my mind active because I felt like I was drifting off. Then something even more frightening happened. Only about 10 minutes after I saw that man, I saw another man on the side of the road, also in a suit, also just standing there. What the hell was going on? I slowed down to pull over and possibly ask if everything was okay and maybe offer a ride. I don't know what I was thinking, but either way, when I was on the shoulder almost to a stop, I looked in the rearview mirror and then turned around completely, and that man was gone as if he had just disappeared. I stepped on the gas and got back on the road. I was losing it. I needed to stop for another coffee. I had about an hour and a half to go at this point. I stopped at the first pit stop I could find and bought a medium coffee. I drank a few sips, but as I was sitting in the rest area gas station parking lot, I spotted a man in a suit again, standing under a light post. Same man. This time I got a clearer view of his face. He looked like a middle-aged white man, short, dark brown hair, clean-shaven, and a neutral expression. But it was the way he was once again facing my car that freaked me the underscore out. I turned the car on and got out of there without looking back. I wanted to complete this drive, but the coffee wasn't doing it. I felt like I was going to pass out behind the wheel. I wasn't going to make it, so I pulled off the highway and parked in a random parking lot. I angled the seat all the way down and attempted to go to sleep. As tired as I was, I couldn't help but be scared in this empty parking lot. Scared that if I opened my eyes, I would see that man in the suit again. I was drifting into sleep when something made me wake up again and open my eyes. Probably my mind playing tricks on me. I looked around the outside of my car, scared I was going to see him. I looked out each window and then the front windshield, and it was clear. Then I looked in the rearview mirror and I felt my soul leave my body for a second, because there, I saw for a moment a person in the back seat. It was the man in the suit again, but I didn't look long enough because I opened the door, screamed, and fell backwards out of the car. As I crawled back, I kept screaming until I finally got up, looked inside the car, and saw nobody. The back seat was empty. As I came to my senses, I realized my mind had been playing tricks on me all night. There was no man in a suit. I was just completely exhausted and needed to sleep. I got back in my car, my heart racing. Honestly, now I was too awake to go to sleep. I turned the car back on, finished my coffee, and banged out the rest of the drive. By the time I checked into the hotel and got to my room, I fell into bed and passed out right away. The next day, my first interview was at 11 a.m., so I didn't get much sleep, but I definitely felt somewhat recharged. However, the second my interviewer walked out to greet me, I froze up. My interviewer looked identical to the image of that man in the suit I kept hallucinating the night before. I know the interviewer noticed me freeze up. I could see it in his face. I tried to recover from this, but it set the tone for the rest of the interview, and I was completely nervous and out of it. I felt like I was in a dream. I left that interview with only an hour to get ready for my next one. My next interviewer was a woman, and I did much better with this one because I actually got the job.
I still work here and live in North Carolina now. My old therapist told me that she thinks the stress of mentally preparing for the interviews mixed with the lack of sleep caused me to hallucinate. The main cause of my fear and stress was that I hallucinated a man in a suit because that's who I pictured would be interviewing me. I feel like it doesn't sound too far-fetched, but it doesn't change how downright horrific the whole ordeal was.
My dad has been a subway station manager for 35 years. In his job, there always needs to be a manager on duty, so he's worked every possible shift, including night shifts. Most trains were completely empty during the night, which was the only nice part about working then. He has many funny and weird night shift stories, but there's one truly scary one. One night, my dad had just boarded a train to move to his office at another station. It was around 3 o'clock in the morning, and he was alone when he got on. At the next station, someone else boarded. My dad described him as a tall, skinny man, wearing a heavy jacket and a beanie. The man glanced at my dad before sitting in the farthest corner away from him. My dad felt uncomfortable as the guy kept looking at him every so often. When my dad's stop came, he got off the train, and so did the other man. My dad walked to his office door, unlocked it, and looked behind him. The man in the jacket was pacing around about 50 feet away. My dad stepped into his office, shut the door, locked it, and sat at his desk. 5 minutes later, someone tried to turn the doorknob. When the person realized it was locked, they started to knock softly. My dad called out, "Who is it?" And they responded, "I want to talk." He told whoever it was to go away, knowing trouble when he saw it. He had a strong feeling it was the guy from the train, since the station was usually empty at that time. The guy continued to knock for a good 5 minutes. Finally, my dad pulled up the security camera screens and brought up the camera, pointing at his office door. Sure enough, it was the guy from the train wearing the jacket and beanie. Coincidentally, as soon as my dad brought up the camera, the man walked away. My dad did his work for about half an hour before leaving to catch the next train. He checked the camera to make sure the weird guy wasn't out there, locked up, and walked down the stairs to the platform. He got on the train right away and saw the guy from before walking down the stairs to the platform and stepping into the same car as my dad. The man sat down on the opposite side, a few seats to the right. My dad tried to look away and pretend not to notice him, but he knew the guy was staring at him. At one point, my dad gave in and stared back, giving a slight nod and smile as a peace gesture before looking away again. The man stared at my dad the whole ride to the next station, but my dad never looked back at him again after the first time. You might wonder why my dad didn't try to confront the guy. Despite my dad's big size, he's always been a gentle giant. Plus, he feared the guy might be armed, and one wrong move could be dangerous. When the train stopped at the station, my dad practically ran back up to the streets, constantly glancing over his shoulder. Yes, the man from the train was following him. My dad had to find a public place that was still open to try to escape. He found a fast food restaurant that was open and stepped inside. He watched as the guy following him walked up to the window, stopped, and stared at him through the glass for about 10 seconds before turning around and walking away. My dad waited a little longer before leaving the restaurant to get to his third and final station for the night. The scariest part was when my dad was in his third office. He was checking the security cameras out of paranoia and saw the guy from the train pacing around outside, only about 30 feet from his office. The man then stopped, looked up at the camera, and literally froze, staring for no less than a minute. When he finally lowered his head, he walked away from the station and was never seen by my dad again. My dad doesn't know if he was followed after leaving the restaurant, but it would make sense. The guy was clearly disturbed, possibly homeless and or dangerous, and who knows what he actually wanted with my dad. My two kids, Jack and Emma, are twins, and they're 6 years old. A year ago, we were living in our old house in Portland, but something happened that led us to move. It's a long, awful story. I lived in that house for 4 years. My wife Sarah and I got married while I was living there, and we had our kids there too. The neighborhood was slowly changing, and not for the better, but even so, we originally planned on staying in that house for the foreseeable future until this happened. We were in a corner house, and the house behind us on the intersecting road was hidden by tall trees and bushes, so we hardly ever saw those neighbors. Our neighbor on the right, Mark, had just moved in less than a year ago at the time. I had only spoken with him a couple of times. Both times, I could hardly understand what he said because of his heavy accent, and he just didn't seem very friendly. Two of his windows overlooked our backyard, so there wasn't much privacy. However, I never saw the lights on in those rooms, so I assumed they were unused guest rooms or something like that. One summer day, Jack and Emma were playing in the backyard in their blow-up pool with their water guns while I was outside doing yard work. At one point, I was walking toward the detached garage when I saw Mark at his window. Only half a second after noticing him, he turned and walked away from the window. It was slightly odd, but I let it go. Later that day, as the sun was going down, the kids went back outside to play again. It was a very hot day, so they got back in their blow-up pool while Sora and I were in the kitchen as she made dinner. Then the kids' laughter went quiet for a while, and suddenly Emma came inside and said there was a flashing light from the neighbor's window. I followed her into the backyard and asked her to show me what she was talking about. She pointed to one of Mark's upstairs windows that overlooked our backyard and said there was a white light that kept flashing from that window. I immediately assumed the worst and asked the twins if it looked like a camera flash. They both said yes. I told them it was time to dry off and come inside. I helped them dry off and brought them in, then told Sarah about it. She immediately assumed the worst, just like I did. She said I should go next door and knock on Mark's door, so I did, but when I did, he never answered. His car was in the driveway, so he had to be home. After a few attempts at knocking and ringing the bell, I gave up and went back to my house. I told Sarah he wasn't opening the door, which made what the kids said seem even more believable. While we couldn't prove that the white light the kids saw was a camera flash, it sure did sound like it, and it was concerning to hear. Some time passed, maybe even weeks, before one night when Sarah and I were in the bedroom, we heard our side gate being quietly opened and closed outside. Sarah wanted me to check outside, so I stepped into the backyard and looked around. I turned on all the lights as I searched, but found nothing, and nobody. However, I noticed the lights in Mark's backyard were on. I went over to look over the fence into his yard and nearly jumped out of my skin when he came up to the fence from the other side and asked if I needed something. I asked him if he'd seen or heard anyone sneaking through our yard, and he said no. I took this time to ask him bluntly if he had been watching my kids, as they thought someone was at his window taking pictures of them playing in the pool. His reaction was a bit suspicious. He acted overly offended, almost yelling at me for such an accusation. Without proof, I couldn't and didn't want to start issues with a neighbor. I apologized and went back inside. Sarah was not happy about this, saying he's full of it. The next incident didn't happen until another few weeks later. This time, it was in the middle of the night when we were asleep. I woke up to Sarah shaking me in a panic. I looked around the room, confused at first, but then I heard the kids screaming from their room. I jumped out of bed and ran downstairs to the kids' room. Jack was awake and crying, and I found out a few seconds later that his crying and screaming had woken Emma, who was also crying and screaming. Jack said there was someone outside the window a second ago, and there was a camera flash from the window. I got goosebumps, but I also felt my blood begin to boil. All I could say was, "What did he look like?" He said he didn't see. I brought the kids up to our room to sleep in the bed with us. With the lights off, I peeked out our bedroom window to look across at Mark's unlit house next door. I looked at each window of his house and found him. Just like me, he was peeking out one of the upstairs windows in that same room that overlooked our backyard. I stormed outside to his door and rang his doorbell about 15 times. He never opened his door. I did call the police just to make a report on Mark. That way, if any future reports were made about him from other people, maybe the police department would look into him. I never saw him again. Sometimes I'd sit out front waiting to see him outside, but he'd clearly avoid coming out when I was there. Because of this, we ended up moving within a month to a new house in a different but nearby town, which has proven to be a better place to raise the kids. There used to be a pond about half a mile from my old house where I often went fishing. It was known as Daryl's Pond, though I never knew who Daryl was or why it was called that. It was an open spot, so occasionally others would fish there too, but most of the time it was just me. I had a small kayak that I tied to a pole I'd set up on the shore. It was around 3 o'clock in the afternoon when I paddled out to the middle of the pond, which was the best spot for catching fish. As I was fishing, I noticed someone coming out of the trees. I waved and smiled at him, and he hopped into a small boat near the edge of the pond and started rowing towards me. As he got closer, I greeted him, saying, "Beautiful day, isn't it?" He replied, "Yes, absolutely." He then fell silent. The awkwardness started to build, and I felt like I had to keep the conversation going. "So, are you here to do some fishing?" I asked. "No, I don't actually fish," he said. "Well, it's never a bad day to relax on the pond," I added, trying to keep things light. But he kept rowing closer until his boat bumped into mine with a loud thud. I felt really uncomfortable. I wasn't scared yet, just weirded out. I was only 24 years old, and this guy looked like he was in his late 40s or 50s. The silence was unbearable. I pretended to focus on fishing, but I couldn't stop thinking about how strange this guy was. I could feel him staring at me. Even as I turned halfway away from him, When I glanced to my right, he was indeed staring. I decided to be brave and made eye contact with him. After a few seconds, he looked away. "So, where are you from?" I asked him. He pointed behind himself towards the wooded hill leading past the dirt road and said, "Up there." "Oh, you live by Suffolk?" I asked. No, I don't," he replied. The conversation was awkward, and his responses were short and unhelpful. He just sat there with a half smile, either looking at me or in my general direction. I was getting more and more creeped out, and my heart was racing. I started rowing slowly towards the shore, trying to act like I was just looking for a better fishing spot. But I was terrified when I realized he was following me. "It's a great day, huh?" I said, my voice shaking. I got close enough to the shore and finally told the man, "I think I'm going to call it a day." When I turned to see his reaction, he was still staring at me, but the smile was gone. "I can't let you leave," he said, lifting his flannel shirt to reveal a handgun tucked into his jeans. The moment I processed what I was seeing, I dove out of the boat and ran for the shore. I sprinted the half-mile uphill through the woods back to my house, locking every door and window as soon as I got inside. I pulled down the blinds, but left a small crack so I could peek outside, just to make sure I wasn't being followed. As it got dark, I kept the lights off and continued watching the front yard. Eventually, I convinced myself that I hadn't been followed. Looking back, I know I should have called the police right away, and not doing so was a huge mistake. I left my bedroom windows open to let the room air out, figuring it was safe since my room was on the second floor. About half an hour after I turned off the light and got under the covers, I heard the sound of leaves crunching outside. I sat up to listen more closely. It was definitely something, or someone, walking around out there. Normally, I would have assumed it was a deer or a bear, but after what had just happened, I was still on edge. I sat up, barely moving, except for the trembling from fear, waiting as the footsteps stopped. "Hey, buddy, you up there? Trying to sleep?" "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you," said a voice from outside. It was the same voice. I knew it instantly. I didn't make a sound. I crept out of my room, quietly went downstairs to the kitchen, and grabbed the phone, practically crawling to avoid being seen through the open blinds. I finally called 911, whispering into the phone, as I still hoped he hadn't spotted me. 20 minutes felt like an hour as I hid behind my bed, fearing I'd hear glass breaking downstairs or a knock on the back door, or worse, the voice again from outside my window. The police arrived and thoroughly checked the property and nearby woods, but found nothing. They suggested I stay with a friend or family member for a few days, so I did. I never saw or heard from the man again, but I moved a month later. I couldn't handle the constant fear and paranoia of being watched through my windows. Now, I feel much safer fishing by the bay. Last year, my fiancé and my mom passed away one after the other. After they died, I fell into a deep depression, even though I tried to pretend I was fine. My friends could see through it, and one close friend insisted that I move in with her to get out of the apartment I had shared with my fiancé for 10 years. She wanted me to start fresh, and although I didn't feel ready to move on, the idea of not living alone sounded appealing. Plus, Her apartment was in a much nicer neighborhood than where I was living, so I finally agreed. Living with her has been great. Our schedules are opposite. I'm working during the day, and she works at night, so we both get our alone time. We also have at least one day off together each week to hang out. Moving also allowed me to walk to work, since it's so close, which I thought would be a blessing. But that 10-minute walk turned into a 2-month-long nightmare. One evening after work, I decided to sit in the park between my apartment and my job. As I was sitting there, a man approached me. He was almost handsome, though a bit rough-looking. Even though I live in a city with a lot of homeless people, it didn't cross my mind that he might be one of them. I smiled and looked back at my phone, expecting him to walk by, but he didn't. He asked me what time it was, and when I looked up to tell him, I noticed the random stuff he was carrying. A kid's chalkboard with scribbles all over it, a paper bag full of old magazines and papers, and a metal shelf that once held CDs. I also noticed he wasn't wearing shoes, and his hands were filthy. It finally hit me that this was not going to be a normal encounter. He started talking non-stop, some of it making no sense, and some of it almost coherent, but all of it strange. From what I could follow, he told me he had just been released from prison and was looking for a tattoo shop to get a Department of Corrections tattoo. Then he noticed a button on my bag with the logo of a local bar. He told me he had gone there one night and went home with someone, then looked me up and down and said, "But young ladies are my problem." I quickly gathered my things and left. I love my new apartment, but it has its downsides, which became very clear after this encounter. The apartment is on the first floor, which I liked because you can walk out the sliding glass doors, one in the living room and one in my bedroom, onto a nice gated patio with tables and grills. It's great in the summer, but now I hate it because it's right on the street and the fence is easy to climb. One very early morning, around 5 a.m., I heard a man scream, "What the hell are you doing?" so loudly and so close that it woke me from a dead sleep. I thought it was coming from inside my bedroom, but it turned out to be outside. A neighbor leaving for work had found that same man from the park sleeping against my sliding glass door. The guy got scared off, and my neighbor checked on me. Once I calmed down, I tried to brush it off as a weird coincidence. 2 weeks later, I was sleeping when, at some point, the man came onto the patio and started tapping on my sliding glass door. I just lay there, frozen in fear, until he escalated to full-on kicking the glass. I turned on the light to grab my phone, and he took off. I called the police, and they came to take a report and review the building's security footage. The footage confirmed it was the man from the park. Even more disturbing, the hallway cameras showed that on more than one occasion, he had slipped into the building behind a resident and sat in the lobby for hours. At one point, he even tried my doorknob and my neighbors to see if they were locked. He also hid in the little mailbox room when he saw my roommate coming in from work. The police think he either followed me from the park or just happened to notice me on the patio at some point. It's been a few weeks and I haven't seen him, and no one has reported seeing him around the building. My roommate bought me pepper spray and a kind but overly protective neighbors who has made it very clear he is retired military and a bit of a gun enthusiast, checks on me nightly, so I'm not as freaked out as I could be.